will come with a 8-minute rebuttal, and then Derek will follow with his 8-minute rebuttal.
Well, some things that my opponent said that should be rebutted. He said that he doesn't see the Christian God, but yet he claims that he used to be a Christian. Yet the concept of God is that he's a non-physical entity. So I don't understand why he doesn't understand the concept that God's not physical. He says that he would like someone to show him the existence of God, yet he said the only things that he can know are by sense perception. So since you can't see God, he's just automatically, by definition, saying you can never show me a God because the only things I know are by sense perception. And since you can't show God by sense perception, then I won't believe in God. Well, you can't show the laws of logic by sense perception. There's a podium here, there's chairs, and you particular people sitting out there. I've never seen the law of modus ponens sitting next to someone. The law, a logical syllogism, or the rules of inference don't sit on the ground next to rocks. So I guess Derek can't believe in the laws of logic. If he's going to be consistent, he needs to say, well, I don't see the laws of logic. Or I would really love to believe in the laws of logic if someone would just show me the existence of them. See, he's not consistent from his worldview. He has this internal tension. Remember I talked about in my opening argument that someone's worldview is how they determine facts and evidence, and evidence and everything is interpreted from their worldview. So you have a worldview on the one hand that says you can only know things by sense perception, and then you're going to go and talk about things that cannot be sensed, such as the laws of logic. So then, according to his worldview, he has this internal tension. He's got to give up one of them. He can't hold both of them, otherwise he's inconsistent. He said, identity and existence are natural axioms, naturalistic axioms. I mean, I believe in existence and the law of identity. I don't know. He didn't show how they're naturalistic axioms. Furthermore, identity is a logical law. A is always A. I don't see how it's a naturalistic axiom. It's not something that's material. If it's something that's material, I have identity. Where is it? Where is my physical identity? Since Derek says I have identity, then where is it? Could you cut open my head and pull out identity? Or is it running through my body like blood? So I don't see where this identity is. He talks about things, makes recourse to things in his speech, such as atomic layers. I'd like to know where he saw an atomic layer. I've never seen atomic layers. He says people are justified by believing because they're only going by what they know. Their parents told them Santa Claus exists, and they leave milk and cookies out, and so they're justified in believing in Santa Claus. I don't see the logical connection between leaving milk and cookies out and your parents telling you and you're justified, unless you want to say that other personal testimony is what can justify belief. Well, then what justifies personal testimony? How do you know that personal testimony is ever reliable as a method of justification? You could say, well, people have told me certain things, but you just appealed to testimony to prove your theory of personal testimony is something which can be justified. It also assumes memory. And how do you know your memory is reliable? Has Derek observed through sense perception that his memory is reliable? How would he prove that? Would he say, oh, well, I remember leaving my keys in my pocket. When I reached back in there, it was in there. Well, he just appealed to memory in order to prove his memory. So it would be a circular argument. Remember in my opening argument I mentioned the genetic fallacy, that is attacking the origins of a belief rather than belief itself. Mr. Sansone liked to talk about prophecy, and people just believe that because it's wishful thinking. Well, that's the genetic fallacy. Maybe they did come up by wishful thinking. Maybe people do believe, but that doesn't change that a fact that it could have happened, or that it did happen, or that God exists. Just because if I come up with the existence of God due to wishful thinking doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. It's the genetic fallacy. Prophecies are made after the fact, he said. Again, let's look at his worldview. Let's put everything together. Try to make this a coherent picture for everyone to see. I only know things by sense perception. All prophecy was made after the fact. Did Mr. Sansone observe that? Did he go back to Isaiah's time and certain prophecies in Isaiah and observe that those were put in after the fact? How could he know that? He couldn't, because again, he said he only knows things by sense perception. So that argument is moot when you put his whole worldview together. God of the Old Testament is a God of war. New Testament, 1 Corinthians, says the weapons of our warfare are mighty for the casting down of reasoning and every high thing exalted against the knowledge of God. The Bible's consistent throughout this on this subject. He says, why do you reject a proposition? It's just a relative issue. Well, I don't understand what that means, how it's a relative issue. If it's a relative issue, then he just rejects God, and I just reject atheism, not for objective reasons, but from relative reasons. There's no objective reasons why we're refuting each other's position here, why we're rejecting each other's position. He rejects the proposition God exists, as he said, it's a relative issue. He said there's only one person who can get into his head, him. Well, first off, did he observe that? Has he seen that he's the only person who can get into his head? How does he know that? How can he know that if the only things you know are by sense perception? It also begs the question, remember the fallacy I pointed out in my original argument. He's assuming that the Christian worldview is false. The Christian worldview says that God knows all men's hearts and all men's beliefs, and God can get inside everyone's head. So he begs the question, assuming that Christianity was false. Presuppositions are received from your parents, he said. That's not at all the case. To be able to understand things that your parents said, you're going to have to bring presuppositions in order to understand it. You're going to have some presuppositions of meaning, of logic, of language, and how that's possible. You don't get a presupposition from a parent. That's why it's called a presupposition. It's taken to your evidence. Rape is wrong because he personally objects it. I bet that makes women feel good here tonight. That if someone goes out there and rapes them, he says, well, I personally reject it, but I guess the rapist didn't. He doesn't personally reject that. Murder, I guess it's wrong because he personally rejects it. Remember, I said proof is not subjectivism. Just because Derek subjectively doesn't like something has nothing to do with whether it's wrong or not. And most people, I think, would agree that rape is wrong, molesting children is wrong. And he asks how we know this. Well, we know it's wrong from the revealed Word of God. God has laid down His laws and laid out His character, and we are to live according to His character. And those laws are universal and binding on all men. So within our worldview, I can say rape is wrong. Within his worldview, it's just a person personally rejects it. Well, guess what? I don't like fish. I personally reject it. Rape for Derek is the same as me not liking fish, it turns out. The atheist worldview is philosophically nonsense then. Nerve receptors determine what is accepted and rejected. I'd like to know how he knows that. Did he observe that? He knows everything by observation. So he'd have to know that nerve receptors determine what is accepted and rejected by observation. How does he know that in his brain? Has he observed his nerve receptors determining what is accepted and rejected? He gives us some autobiography saying he doesn't value God's laws. Well, it doesn't matter about his subjective opinions and if he values God's laws or not. That has nothing to do with the objective fact of God's existence. I could say, well, I don't value Derek. I don't value atheism. Would you expect me to come here tonight and argue for the existence of God by saying, well, I don't value atheism. Atheism is just silly, and I personally don't like it. So therefore, atheism can't be real, and God exists.
When I talk about my rejection of something by sense experience, it's because of my inductive path, my personal induction. What is induction? Particular, general, right? My personal historical path of experience depends on the day I was born. It was contingent on the day that I stepped on this planet. I formed values, I formed tastes through that process. And it's like a sphere. You start this big, you grow, you expand, you keep expanding because new data comes in. And I, of course, would agree with Paul that memory is not reliable. I always forget stuff that I know and I remember later on. But new data always changes the way we think about reality. And the epistemological paradigms that we have are relative to our inductive particular experience. We all have individual histories. Why do we all wear different clothes? Why do we all have different tastes? Why do we eat different foods? It's relative to your personal historical path of social conditioning via the senses. Everything that you came to acquire data-wise is via the senses. Prove to me something that happened without the use of your eyes, the use of your ears, or your hands. When you talk about logic, logic is based on me. Me. I'm the singularity. I start it. I'm my own logical process. The laws of logic? Well, how did he know about the laws of logic? I read them. Actually, when someone told me about the laws of logic, my ears picked them up, And then I actually studied books on logic. Now, I'm not a logician like Paul, but I don't have to be a lawyer to know that if I run the red light, I broke a law. I know a little bit about it. And if you really boil it down, logic is based on a variable, 1. Math is based on the logical principle of 1. What is logic? Why is it such a big deal? It's this human convention that is based on the axiom of existence, of identity. We all have individual identities. And the corollaries of the laws of logic, the second and third law, they're all based on that. But big deal. What is that really saying? I can't be anything but Derek. And logical inference comes from our own internal historical path, like I said, of experience. When we infer, we conclude based on our particulars. And we share those conclusions. No one's that secure with their conclusions. On a first date, you don't go into the date going, this is what I love to do, and you pour everything out on the table. No, you wait, because there are intrinsics down the road that you want. And so holding back may be a compromise. It may be instrumental in achieving something greater. And those inferences are based relatively. And the problem with language, there's no problem with language. Language is what we learn. Who cares about a presupposition? Language is injected to us through the senses. How'd you learn your name? Okay, how'd you learn anything? Anything. It came through you being dependent on your parents or your foster parents or whoever raised you. This built your concepts of language. This was your way to label things and know what things were, including you, including God, including laws of logic. Laws of logic, where are they? Write them down. There they are. They're material. They're written on a piece of paper. They're contingent on the material paper. They're contingent on me writing them. No problem for me. Basically, what we have here is he's got a worldview, I've got a worldview. We interpret reality differently. Great. Yes. So what? I'm telling you why I reject it. I'm not telling you got to believe what I say. I'm telling you that I think I have some commonalities with some of you guys, maybe not all of them. But I left on my rejection of certain things, my taste values, which are relative. And for anyone in a church to tell you guys that you are absolutely wrong for the taste that you have, ask them, show me the fault. Where was I wrong? Where did I go wrong? Where was it my fault that I wanted to do this instead of this? Is it just a contrast in our behavior? What is morality really? Just behavior. What's behavior? What you observe me doing physically? So what you observe me doing is my fault when it's contingent on my whole life of growing and learning? What is rationality? He attacks atheists for being irrational. What is the template for rational behavior? What is the template for reason? Or is it the tools that we're reasoning with when we get to the conclusions that you don't like? We come to a conclusion that's in contrast to your worldview. Oh, it must be irrational? Why? Narrow it down. Narrow down why I'm irrational or unreasonable. How, when I deliberate, when I use my tools in my head that are relative to me, how am I irrational? Just because I have a contrast in my behavior, in my taste assignments? It's crazy. When I reject God, I reject the proposition. I say, show it to me. I was in that worldview. I was the guy on Wednesday night Bible study that would raise his hand and go, what? That was me. You guys probably don't like that, but that was me. I wanted to know the data. I wanted to know it. I kept going, I kept going, I kept going. I wanted to know the truth of this stuff. I'll walk back into this worldview with you guys. If you want to talk theology, let's do it. I'll stay all weekend. Talk to me. Show me the handprints of God. I'm willing. Romans 1 begs the question, who's God? How vague is that? We don't even know who God is. He tells us that we know God. Well, you got to show us God in order for us to know who God is. Is God in the trees? Is he in nature? So great. So God is in the trees. You got to make the correlation between God producing the trees in order for us to know this. If I say my dad builds a swing set for my brother, I can make the correlation because that falls into the human limitations within our abilities. But if you say God designed something or built this, where? Asserting it doesn't prove it. Asserting it doesn't make it true. The Bible is full of assertions. Vague assertions. God did this, God did that. Great. Prove it. The impossibility of the contrary, atheism can account for this. Why does that prove your hypothesis?